Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack, and here for the start of PagerDuty Summit. We are almost through the keynotes. Ray Kurzweil is coming up next, and in the meantime, we're here for a conversation with Matty Stratton, the DevOps Evangelist with PagerDuty, and Ben Connolly, Head of Digital IT at Vodafone. So just want to thank you both for being here. PagerDuty Summit is the annual event for PagerDuty. It's we had heard a lot of keynotes here talking a lot about teams and team orientation. And so I just wanted to get into the discussion maybe to talk a little bit about with both of you all. Ben, you're Head of Digital IT at Vodafone, and as I said, Matty, you're at at PagerDuty. I'm just really curious just to start talking about Vodafone's business goals and how they relate to your DevOps practices. How are you thinking about DevOps at Vodafone? What is the story there, and where are you in that journey?
Sure, yeah. So we're pretty early on in the journey. We're looking across the globe to run a digital transformation, as lots of people are saying these days. For us, fundamentally, that means pace of delivery, pace of responsiveness, the ability to innovate. All of these things come from that pace of delivery. But we're a fairly very large organization who's fairly slow moving in some places, and so we're really keen to change that. And the focus on DevOps is fundamental to that, to empower our teams, to set our teams up with clear goals, and to give them a platform to succeed in that as quickly as possible.
One of the practices that we see emerge is how this idea of digital IT starts in many ways at the board level, right? In the digital transformation story, and then it becomes a DevOps story, in follow, right? So I'm curious about, how you're thinking about the DevOps story through the corporate, from a corporate perspective.
Well, it's actually, it often, again, happens in two areas. So sometimes from the top down, so we want a digital transformation, and that's interpreted, therefore, as a DevOps implementation by the teams. But it's also from the grassroots up. Lots of teams want to work more iteratively, much more agile, and want to or adopt a lot of DevOps practices. So those two things kind of couple up really nicely for us. Our board are really super engaged in the transformation itself, and really keen to see how that is interpreted by our teams. And the fact that it becomes DevOps, as you say, is something that our teams took on to drive that as the solution to that transformation.
So I'm curious about your approach to teams and how you think about teams and how you're thinking about teams kind of through this, through your application architecture development. We focus a lot on, our work on looking at teams and how the teams are working and what are those workflows. Can you tell us about how you're thinking about teams and as you go through that DevOps journey?
Sure. So it's about principles, really. The principles of how we set our teams up, or the tools and technologies that they use, is all about ownership, about autonomy, and again, back to that pace again. So our teams are set up in a way that promotes ownership. It gives them very, very clear sense of what they're responsible for, what level of autonomy they have to make decisions around that thing. And we choose, and we've been through some changes around this, but we choose the technologies and the setup of our teams to really drive that home. So for example, we have a microservices architecture in some of our platforms, and we're really clear that a set of services is owned by a team. And we've been through iterations where that wasn't the case, and we've seen the results when that's not the case. You get diluted ownership, of course, and then you get if something was to go wrong, it's that you deal in a more of who touched it last model, or who's the cleverest guy around can fix this problem, rather than it's this service, it's that person or that team, and again, driving that real sense of ownership into those teams. So it's really built around those principles that we're keen to instill.
I'm curious from your perspective, Matty, about team development, and one of the learnings that we've had in just talking with a lot of people is how important it is to have a team that has that experience on it, right? But you may not have an organization with a lot of experience. And how are you seeing, Vodafone, you must be going through this all the time. I'd love to hear your perspective. But Matty, what is it that you're seeing, or organizationally, and how people are thinking about teams and who they have on their teams?
I think one of the things I always used to say I've been sysops for 2 decades, and I used to say the only difference between a junior sysadmin and a senior sysadmin is a senior sysadmin sits there, shakes his head and says, yeah, I've seen this before, right? And so having that experience matters, but it's a matter of really pure troubleshooting, it's pure detective work, it's sniffing things out. And I was reading recently an exchange on Twitter which said, we do things backwards with our engineers, where we put our senior developers and engineers on new features, and we put our juniors on bug fixes. And the reality is, fixing bugs and resolving incidents and issues requires this gestalt knowledge of the whole system, or a much larger thing that a senior engineer is going to have, whereas an implementation of a feature is kind of giving you some structure. And so I think we're seeing a little bit that maybe someone who's more senior it's not as interesting of work to troubleshoot, but having that experience gives you have more of the understanding of the system where that's built. It's also a factor where I see on teams that succeed are teams when they have accountability. You talked about ownership. I agree with that a lot. I like the word accountability because it ties off of the idea of blamelessness. We're blameless, but there's no lack of accountability. And you're given the information and the ability to do what needs to be done.
Right. So tell us about that, how you're composing your teams, and are you following these principles? What are some of the insights that you're gaining from your team building programs?
So I completely agree. And the reason we drive these principles into our teams is, again, for that accountability, but it's also a sense of pride, and again, back to the ownership side of things, which is we want to have teams that are super close to the outcomes that they're producing, that they're delivering, whereas in a lot of teams, and not just in Vodafone, but across the industry, it can be months between you write some code, you commit it, and then you maybe never see the outcome at all. It's months before it's in front of a customer. So we're really trying to break that down, and with PagerDuty helping us do that, we can really not just set up our teams to have those principles, but see those teams grow and drive their own change and their own structure and their own operation, if you like, to really get the most out of that setup. And that's really something that we've allowed them to do across a number of our teams now, and it's having some awesome results.
A lot of this comes down to workflows, doesn't it? And how you think about workflows. Mm-hmm. So you have these teams, and how are you thinking about these workflows that these teams are using?
It does come down to workflows, I think, and we look at ways to use our tooling, like PagerDuty and others, to really give teams a sense of how work comes to them, but also how it flows through and cycles back again, and it's through the visibility and other tools that we have, like the new visibility tool that PagerDuty's just announced, in fact, that really gives that insight and that proximity, if you like, to the outcomes that each of our engineers are really producing.
Do the teams define the workflows, or do the workflows define the teams? It's a tricky question. I think I often talk about teams. I could talk about people, teams, workflows, and technologies.
So I think that when you have a highly functioning team, you need to get out of the way.
Yeah.
Right? And if a team knows what's going to work best for them, and they show that with results, organizations I've worked with in the past, very, very large, maybe 3-letter organizations, not necessarily PagerDuty, but where they're saying, okay, we're going to have this way we're going to do all of the work across tens of thousands of developers and everything like that. And there's so many different humans involved that you end up kind of having this law of averages, and it means you end up getting average work. So but if you have exceptional people, or you have people who will rise to the best that they can do, let them do what they need to be able to do. So you got to figure out where there's those tricky things, like you're not going to let every team of 8 people choose their own monitoring solution across 10,000 teams, because you have an economy of scale. But when you're thinking about the workflow, it's like a microsite, right? It's a black box. It's stuff comes in, it gets done, and output comes out. But it needs to be measurable. That's the thing. You have to earn that respect as well, and you earn that by being aligned to business outcomes and delivering on those business outcomes. And I really liked what you said about being close to seeing return on that time investment that happened. So I think it goes both ways. I think the team can define the workflow, but they have to earn it.
Right.
I have to display result in ways that make sense to the larger organization.
So when you know when a team's not earning it? Like, what are some of the things you're looking for to see, like, to help delineate between these highly functioning teams and maybe these teams that need to improve upon how they operate?
Yeah, so we have a set of teams in various degrees of maturity. Some try things, some fail. Others are kind of steady, if you like. And it's not a case of they would stand out for not delivering, if you like. It's more a case that they are, they're again trying things out. They're looking for their own way of doing things, and if they need support, and we can move teams around, and we can share resources. But again, I'd really like the balance I think that we need to strike between giving that autonomy to a team to deliver in its own way, but also share the same principles across an organization, same priorities, same principles of transparency and predictability and things like that. So it's just a balance to strike, and we're constantly learning and evolving our model as well. So.
I just want to say, when you, Ben, brought up the visibility tool that we've announced today, and that's a way to have your business outcomes and your technical outcomes in teams be tied together, your business services and your technical services, because I think it's really important to speak a common language when it comes to that, where it's not having to go through some Rosetta Stone translation of this is what the quote-unquote business meant by being well, but I mean that I'm doing well by this other marker. Big believer in, I always tell people when I'm speaking to engineers or whatever, and I say, you need to be able to tell me right now, how does your company make money? If you can't answer this to me right now, then go find out. I'll wait.
Mm-hmm. So, just backing up a little bit, I'm curious on the story of DevOps and its history at Vodafone. Mm-hmm. What precipitated it? Vodafone's one of the world's largest telecom companies, right? What was it that was a factor there that in really driving this? I mean, we all know kind of very closely that we're moving into these more application-oriented worlds, mm-hmm. right? But what were the telltale signs of Vodafone? What were those signals that were saying, we have to do this?
So it's kind of an evolution. I think we've always been an innovative company. We made the first phone call in the UK, mobile call, and it's something that was kind of, we push across the entire business. It's not, we believe that every one of us can innovate if we have the platform to do so, and part of the DevOps movement is really to unleash that. It's to give, again, back to that point of if we reduce the time it takes to get your code or your work into production and to try things out, we are much more likely to be able to find new avenues, new streams and new opportunities naturally, if you like, without trying to force it. And so DevOps really came, it evolved naturally. It wasn't some big DevOps decision that we made and said, right, let's try this now. It just happened organically throughout the team, and it's picked up such a head of steam now that it's too late. It's taking over, so it's really starting to drive.
It's too late.
Itself, yeah.
It's too late to turn back now.
Yeah.
I could sing, but I won't. So now when we talk about that in terms of technology adoption, that must have its own, I'm sure it has its own story there.
Yeah, sure.
And how you've been thinking about technology adoption.
Oh, for sure. In terms of the cloud, in terms of
DevOps practices in your teams and workflows, I'm thinking specifically.
Well, absolutely, and the technology that we choose to drive those types of things is absolutely essential. And we haven't always made awesome decisions in that space. We've tried things and we've moved on. Again, we've done things in particular ways, and it's taken some time to realize that actually in this model, with these new principles, different technologies or different architectures or different patterns actually will unlock or unleash a lot more potential from our teams than others might have done.
I'm always curious about what possibly didn't work, just because it provides insights to like what is working now, right? Mm-hmm. So what were some of the things that weren't working very well? I think so. Things that I think we learn from really is when we make decisions, we need to be bold with those things. So sometimes with the cloud, for example, we moved to the cloud, and our first forays there were. We migrated to it, but we didn't really leverage it. We didn't become native to the cloud straight away. And I think really deciding to go all in like that has been a huge moment for us, and it really, again, unlocked a lot of potential. Back to those PACE principles and the ownership principles, giving the teams the ability to really live by those things is when you are truly in the cloud, in the public cloud. So, we're talking, DevOps is a lot about measurement. So what are you defining to measure? What are you choosing what to measure, and how are you then?
Been through a cycle there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the early days we were getting started and we were looking for things desperately to measure, so we picked anything with a number on it. There's lots of people who pick velocity, there's a number, let's try that, predictor and all of these things. But of course it's a very volatile number, it doesn't really mean what you want it to. So we've evolved and we've moved on, and now we focus on things that drive real value and outcomes from each of our teams. So how many times do we release? How quickly do we recover when things go wrong? How long does it take from a piece of work to get to an engineer into production? Those cycle times, things that are genuinely driving, again, those teams' behaviors that we want.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one metric I always have liked to recommend is what John Willis calls commit to cash.
Yeah.
Right? How long does it take from that commit to that you're realizing value on it? And just you want to see. And the thing that's important with the measurement, I've always thought, is the number itself isn't what matters. It's not like I'm a 7 and you're a 6, so I'm better. But I want to see that I'm moving the needle. I have to start somewhere, and it's interesting because a lot of times as well you get I'm going to measure everything with a number on it, but you have so many axes, you don't know what something is. And I found 3 seems to be a good place to start. And it's not necessarily that you're going to pick the right 3, but continually see if you're seeing movement in that and see if it correlates and revisit that regularly. It's continuous improvement, right? On how we're doing DevOps itself should be continuously improved.
So Ben, what was the decision to adopt PagerDuty as a core part of your technology infrastructure at Vodafone?
I remember the decision with the conversation. It was we were looking for a tool, not necessarily for a feature set, but for how it will help us get to the culture that we need. So how does it enable those principles again, and how does it give our teams the ability to live by those things? And the feature set is awesome, obviously, but it's more about using tools or companies that help us really fulfill our ambitions in the DevOps space. So it was a fairly easy decision. It's an awesome company, and it's with what we've seen today as well, it's only going to help us to live by that even more, I think. But it's genuinely, again, back to that point of giving us the sense of the value that each of our engineers are really delivering, and then instilling that sense of pride and ownership again in what they do, which is again a cycle to drive even further value from it.
So would you follow that principle of commit to cash? Is that
sure? Well, we call it cycle time, but it's for sure. And driving that down is again super important. It can be months in some organizations before that happens. So I'm curious, Matty, what's your take on this then? And so if you're seeing kind of an approach like this at a company like Vodafone, what's dissimilar to seeing the adoption that you're seeing in other companies?
I think it's because you're starting. There's something that I think you're doing well that you talked about for sure is you're looking at value-based, and by value I mean value to the company, right? You talked about how it's driven from both directions, and you're looking to realize value. There's quite a few people, I think, and organizations that are going through these transformations are doing it because this is the thing you're supposed to do now, So this is why 80% of CIOs have a DevOps initiative over the next 2 years, but I think it's something like only 10% are actually implementing any type of DevOps or cloud strategy right now. So it's the thing so part of it, what you're doing really well that a lot of organizations aren't, is you're actually doing it instead of just talking about it.
Right.
And also looking, making bold decisions and being willing to take the risk. There is such a culture in our IT background of analysis paralysis that we are never going to think of every single thing that could possibly go wrong. And by the time we think about it, the situation has changed and now we have to start all over again. And being able to take bold risks, calculated risks, we don't just YOLO off a bridge and say, okay, well, whatever, it's fine. And I had some large organizations I've worked with where spent a lot of time with just some simple implementations because they're like, we have to think of every single edge case. And I said, you know what? You're never going to. You're never going to get to 100% feeling okay about this. So feel mostly okay about it, get some good success, and you'll feel even better about it.
Right. It's curious to me because, we hear about that in IT, about, the analysis paralysis. I wonder sometimes about the degree of stress that comes with a job in IT that we've seen over the past 20 years, where it can be 24/7. I could almost understand that analysis paralysis.
I understand it 100% because in a pathological organization, messengers are shot.
Yeah.
Right. Failure leads to blame.
Yeah.
So you're looking to cover your butt.
Right.
In generative organization, failure leads to inquiry. Right. You have failure, you do better.
Right.
So it takes that stress off. It's by no means a character flaw that people act this way. It's how many decades of the personality of our IT organizations and our corporate organizations that have trained us to put up these shields.
So how do you go from analysis to paralysis to, to instead of being reactionary to being really predictive
and more iterative? So I think for us it comes back down to that transformation. So large companies, they're large for a reason. They have a reason for their success, and they kind of protect that, and they build an immune system around it. And so when these transformation journeys come up, then it can come as a threat, or can be seen as disruptive. And in a lot of places, it's kind of let's do a transformation, but you better not change anything along the way. And so it's really about having that support, that air cover from above, and the buy-in from the teams to really go for it, and to be able to take those calculated risks and try things out, iterate. If it works, you keep going, and if it doesn't, you do something different. But have that kind of mindset about you and really work out what fits.
So it's just in conclusion, I'd like to look for a minute going forward, right? And thinking about Vodafone's continued journey, and when you talk about this culture, right, and you talk about how the executive management is playing a role in kind of just encouraging this, how are you going to build upon that? Like, how do you kind of fulfill the story so you can, realize these true upsides?
Well, we're going to iterate towards it. We'll figure that out.
It's the iteration
step along the way.
Yeah.
We kind of, again, it's really tempting to sit and design the organization in 5 years, or look at the end game for this thing. But really, the trick is when you know what's working and you keep doing it, and you see where it takes you.
Just keep building on it.
And you quickly learn to stop doing what's not adding value, or not taking you in that direction. But not get hung up on exactly where we're going to end up, I think.
Right. So to stop the analysis paralysis, to speak, right? Well, great. Well, thank you so much for for taking the time. Ben, been joined with Ben Connolly, head of digital IT at Vodafone, and Matty Stratton, DevOps Evangelist at PagerDuty. Thank you very much for your time, and look forward to talking with you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Great.